Welcome back for the next session in the Let's Read Frankenstein series. Last time we covered letter number 1 up through chapter 4. Today we'll be covering chapters 5 through 10. So hopefully you've read that portion of the book before we begin, because this is full spoilers. We're going to go in detail. So last time when we left Victor Frankenstein, he was conducting experiments. He was self-confessed torturing animals and animating dead inanimate flesh and giving it life. He had some minor successes and began constructing a human who he proclaimed would be the leader of a new race, or the first of a new species, right, that would bless Victor as his creator and source. So here we go, chapter 5. We're going to see this creature that Victor has constructed be imparted with life. He says, "It was on a dreary night of November that I beheld the accomplishment of my toils. With an anxiety that almost amounted to agony, I collected the instruments of life around me, that I might infuse a spark of being into the lifeless thing that lay at my feet. It was already 1 a.m. The rain pattered dismally against the panes, and my candle was nearly burned out, when by the glimmer of the half-extinguished light, I saw the dull yellow eye of the creature open. It breathed hard, and a convulsive motion agitated its limbs." So he's done it. This is the moment of glory and triumph that Victor was building towards. And how does he react to this? Well, he says, "How can I describe my emotions at this catastrophe? Or how delineate the wretch with such infinite pains and care I had endeavored to form?" So he calls it a catastrophe. It's not a glorious moment of triumph. He's looking at something horrible that has taken place here. He goes on to describe the appearance of the creature, about his proportions. He describes his hair, being lustrous black, and teeth, pearly whiteness. He says he had designed the creature to be beautiful, but he says these luxuriances only formed a more horrid contrast with his watery eyes, that seemed almost the same color as the dun white sockets to which they were set, his shriveled complexion and straight black lips. The different accidents of life are not so changeable as the feelings of human nature. I had worked hard for nearly 2 years for the sole purpose of infusing life into an inanimate body. For this I had deprived myself of rest and health. Again, we're going back to this thing of obsession. He's been so obsessed with doing this that his own health has suffered, his relationships with his family and friends. Okay, he's neglected them. This is all he's been working on. He says, "I desired it with ardor that far exceeded moderation, but now that I had finished, the beauty of the dream vanished, and breathless horror and disgust filled my heart. Unable to endure the aspect of the being I had created, I rushed out of the room and continued a long time traversing my bedchamber, unable to compose my mind to sleep." So he actually flees from the creature. He's so disgusted by what he's seen. Now he ends up falling asleep, and the creature standing over him in his bedroom, in his bed, but he doesn't speak. And then Victor takes off. He flees out of the room. He actually calls the creature. He says, "I gazed on him while unfinished. He was ugly then, but when those muscles and joints were rendered capable of motion, it became a thing such as even Dante could not have conceived." So he says that this creature is more ghastly than anything that Dante in his Divine Comedy came up with. All the horrors that you see in the Infernus, right? He says the creature is more disturbing than all these scenes from that novel. that book. Victor's going to take off. He flees, and then he quotes a line from here, okay, a passage from The Rime of the Ancient Mariner by Samuel Taylor Coleridge, who, again, where this is the second time that this has been brought up. The Robert Walton at the beginning said that he wasn't going to become the Ancient Mariner when he was writing to his sister, the captain at the beginning. And here, Victor, now we have Coleridge's Ancient Mariner, which, again, The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, this mariner is on a seagoing voyage, kills an albatross in an act of cruelty. For no apparent reason, he performs this act of violence against nature, which bears a curse. So Victor here, I think the parallel by bringing this up is that Victor has created a creature and done an act against nature, and now is going to bear a curse for his efforts. So Victor's just gone, stark raving mad, essentially, and he runs into his buddy Henry Clerval. Henry Clerval has come to visit Victor, and Victor sees that the creature is gone. Okay? He says here, when I became assured that mine enemy had indeed fled, I clapped my hands for joy and ran down to Clerval. And they're spending time together now. But Victor's gone, basically. He's just a raving lunatic at this point. He says, the form of the monster on whom I had bestowed existence was forever before my eyes, and I raved incessantly concerning him. Victor's just going bananas, and basically Henry tells him to get a hold of himself. He's like, compose yourself, said Clerval. Clerval gives Victor some letters from home, from family. Elizabeth, right? Elizabeth tells Victor in these letters about home life, about how earnest Victor's brother has grown. He's now 16 years old, and is talking about entering foreign service, but the family doesn't want him to. She then goes on to talk about Justine Moritz. Now, Justine is going to be an important character here very shortly. She relates that Justine is the family servant, a girl that came into the family's care when she was 12 years old. She was the third of 4 children. Her mother died, and she was taken into the family and given an education. Here's a social commentary being delivered, because Elizabeth writes, again, Elizabeth being Victor Frankenstein's adopted sister, okay, who is referred to as cousin, because in the original version from 1818, Elizabeth was originally Victor's cousin, but has been rewritten here in this revision as a sister. But she says, a servant in Geneva does not mean the same thing as a servant in France and England. Justine, thus received in our family, learned the duties of a servant, a condition which in our fortunate country does not include the idea of ignorance and a sacrifice of dignity of a human being. So this is a shot at France and England, where she says servitude is much undesirable, that it's a loss of dignity and people are left in ignorance. Justine Moritz here has received an education. So there's a couple of letters from home, or a correspondence from home. Victor remains where he's at in Ingolstadt University with his friend Henry. And Henry, he learns, has been reading the writings from the East, writings from the Orient, literature, poetry, these types of things. Probably something like Arabian Nights and these other things he's reading. And Victor resolves that he's going to return home to Geneva, but he doesn't make it because the weather turns. He's going to go in the fall, but he ends up wintering where he's at. And then the spring comes and he receives another letter from home, this time from his father, Alphonse. You pick up in chapter 7. Alphonse Frankenstein writes to Victor saying, "William is dead." Now this is Victor's youngest brother. He says, "That sweet child whose smiles delighted and warmed my heart was so gentle yet so gay. Victor, he is murdered." So we find out that young William Frankenstein has been murdered, and now Victor will be returning home. He informs Henry that his brother is dead, and they journey back to Switzerland. When arriving back in Switzerland, Victor's very melancholy and sad, but his spirits are lifted by the surrounding beauty of the Alps. And while he's watching a storm, that's up in the mountains, off in the distance, his soul is kind of lifted up, and he begins to feel, like the lifting up of the human spirit just by gazing upon the beauty of nature. We'll never see Victor acknowledge God throughout any of this. I don't know if Victor Frankenstein is a deist or if he's a pantheist or what. You never see him praise the glory of God, but it's always the glory of nature, as if nature itself contains God. It's very strange. You see Victor praying to the mountains throughout the text. For instance, on page 58 here, he says, "Dear mountains, my own beautiful lake, how do you welcome your wanderer? Your summits are clear, the sky and lake are blue and placid. Is this to prognosticate peace or to mock at my unhappiness?" So he's praying to nature. Very bizarre. But while Victor's looking up at this tempest, these mountains, right? He sees this storm. He says, "I wandered on with hasty step. This noble war in the sky elevated my spirits. I clasped my hands and exclaimed aloud, 'William, dear angel, this is thy funeral, this thy dirge.' As I said these words, I perceived in the gloom a figure which stole from behind a clump of trees near me. I stood fixed, gazing intently. I could not be mistaken. A flash of lightning illuminated the object and discovered its shape plainly to me, its gigantic stature and the deformity of its aspect more hideous than belongs to humanity, instantly informed me that it was the wretch, the filthy demon to whom I had given life." Now, when God created, so he sees the creature, right? He returns home and he sees his creature in the flashes of lightning, and he's like, "Oh man, that's the thing that I created." Victor's reaction to creating the creature, who is never named, the creature never receives a name at all. Victor is horrified by it. Now, if we go back to the Bible and we look at the creation of Adam, Adam, it says, is formed from the dust of the earth by the hands of God, and then God breathes into Adam, and it says, and Adam became a living soul. And when God has created all of his creation, if you read, the first day, the second day, the third day, the fourth day, God always says at the end of it, "It's good, it's good, it's good, it's good." When he gets to Adam and the formation of man, God breathes Adam and gives him life, and then God says, "It's very good," referring to man. Well, that's not Victor's reaction. It doesn't say that creating this creature is very good. He's referring to this creature as a demon, as a monster. He fled from it. He's horrified by it. So unlike God, in the account in Genesis, who has a relationship with Adam and walks with him in the cool of the Garden of Eden, Victor has fled. He has abandoned his creation. In other words, Victor is a bad god and a bad father. And I wanted to ask you, the audience, does the scientist, at least in the case of Victor, this is a question, bear responsibility for his science, right? Like, when people are experimenting and these things happen that are unintended consequences of, science. I think this goes back to that line in the Jurassic Park where Jeff Goldblum's character is talking to John Hammond, and he says that you are so busy thinking about if you could that you never stop to think if you should. All right, like when John Hammond makes the dinosaurs, because he's thinks that the creation of these dinosaurs from DNA is like this great scientific achievement, and that he's this great man, and these scientists are all great, and this is where they have an ethical discourse and discussion. Well, it's kind of the same thing with Frankenstein here. It seems that Frankenstein was so obsessed, if he could, and so obsessed with the attaining of glory for himself that he never really actually thought through like what would really happen if this creature came to life. And indeed, upon this creature coming alive, he freaked out and ran away. By the way, Frankenstein here is considered, I don't think I ever mentioned this, is considered the first science fiction story. Mary Shelley. So I don't think we would have, science fiction probably would have came into being, but the best science fiction does ask these ethical questions or causes us as readers to ask questions. I think this is one of the things of why Star Trek is so great, is because Star Trek deals with discovery of alien races and strange beings and whatnot, and then asks us questions about ethics, about the nature of man and whatnot. So the best science fiction does this, and this is what Mary Shelley is doing here. So he sees the creature, and he tells us that 2 years had now nearly elapsed since the night on which he first received life. And was this his first crime? So Victor's asking, is William, my little brother, this creature's first victim? Now he's automatically assuming that the creature is the one that killed him. Whether, like, how does he know this? He's just like, yep, the creature did it. Now the creature did kill his brother, but it's interesting to see here that Victor does not think that the creature has benevolence. He just immediately assumes that the creature is a criminal and a murderer. He says, alas, I had turned loose into the world a depraved wretch whose delight was in carnage and misery. Had he not murdered my brother? No one could conceive the anguish I suffered during the remainder of the night, which I spent cold and wet in the open air. And I'm not going to go on with this, but this portion here. But this is Victor's reaction, and he doesn't tell his family. This is the most heinous thing of all, I think, is that Victor doesn't tell anybody about his experiment. He's never told, he doesn't tell Henry Clairville. He doesn't tell his father Alphonse. He doesn't tell Elizabeth. He tells nobody. So what happens next is that Victor is informed by his brother, his other brother, Ernest. Ernest tells him, Victor, he said, the murder is discovered. And Victor says, how, what, who, what? And he's informed that it's Justine Moritz, the family servant. Okay? He says, and then Victor's reaction is, Justine Moritz, poor girl, is she accused? But it's wrongfully. Everyone knows that. No one believes it. Surely, Ernest. But Ernest goes on to reveal to him that it was discovered in Justine's pocket, okay? The picture of their mother. Now, William had been carrying this picture of the mother, their mother around. She died. But they found it in Justine's possession. And so she was arrested and charged with the murder of young William. But Victor's like, no, Justine's innocent. But he doesn't tell anybody. Okay? He says, my tale was not one to announce publicly. Its astounding horror would be looked upon as madness by the vulgar. Did anyone indeed exist except I, the creator, who would believe, unless his senses convinced him, in the existence of the living monument of presumption and rash ignorance which I let loose upon the world? So this guy, man. Victor, I don't like Victor Frankenstein. He hasn't told anybody. I think this is just like, I'm reading this and I'm like, oh, Victor, you abandon your creation and you don't tell anybody what you've done. Victor is not a very likable person. So we go to chapter 8 and we get Justine is now on trial. And Victor is being, throwing himself a pity party here. He says, 1,000 times rather would I have confessed myself guilty of the crime ascribed to Justine, but I was absent when it was committed, and such a declaration would have been considered as the ravings of a madman, and would not have exculpated her who suffered through me. Now, how do you know that, Victor? You're just assuming that, he's assuming that nobody would believe him. So he has resigned Justine Moritz, condemned her to death, essentially, because he didn't even try. He didn't tell anybody. He didn't tell the magistrate. He told no one. Well, we learned that Justine, that everybody basically is turned on her. Many witnesses are called forth that formerly knew her, but they just assume she's guilty. So the girl's condemned. And indeed, she's even confessed to the crime. Elizabeth, who Elizabeth believes that Justine's guilty as well. She speaks with Justine and then is convinced by Justine that she's innocent. So Justine tells Elizabeth that she confessed. She says, I did confess, but I confessed a lie. I confessed that I might obtain absolution. But now that falsehood lies heavier at my heart than all other sins. The God of heaven forgive me. Ever since I was condemned, my confessor had besieged me. He threatened and menaced until I almost began to think that I was the monster that he said I was. He threatened excommunication and hellfire in my last moments if I continued obdurate. Dear lady, I had none to support me. All looked on me as a wretch doomed to ignominy and perdition. What could I do? And in evil hour I subscribed to a lie, and now only am I truly miserable. So she says that she confessed to this murder even though she didn't do it because she was told that if she didn't confess to the crime, that she would be excommunicated from the church, which means that she wouldn't receive, last rites, that she wouldn't receive absolution of her sins through the sacrament of reconciliation, confession. She'd be denied the Blessed Sacrament, and that she would, essentially be condemned to hell. Her eternal soul would be lost forever. So she confessed that she would not be excommunicated from the church. It's just terrible. It's absolutely terrible. Well, Elizabeth believes her now. Elizabeth is now sorry that she thought that Justine was guilty. But Justine, here says, I do not fear to die. She said, that pang is past. God raises my weakness and gives me courage to endure the worst. I leave a sad and bitter world. And if you remember me and think of me as one unjustly condemned, I am resigned to the fate awaiting me. Learn from me, dear lady, to submit in patience to the will of heaven. So Justine is like Christ, okay, who was wrongly accused and condemned to death on the cross, and trusted himself to the Father. And indeed, while he's on the cross, he says of those that have condemned him, he says, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And then in his last breath, he says, into thy hands I commit my spirit. Justine has resigned herself to trust in God. So she's a Christ-like figure. And we saw Victor's mother, when she was dying, okay, she also entrusted herself into the hands of God. So the women in this book are all very pious, people, angelic people, saintly. But Victor here, he's just throwing a pity party for himself, He says, the weight upon my spirit was sensibly lightened. Okay, so this is when he takes off. What does he say here? He says, when I reflected on... trying to find where I'm at. All right. He goes on. He blames himself for the death of William. He blames himself for the death of Justine. But again, he does not... he says, sleep fled from my eyes. I wandered like an evil spirit, for I had committed deeds of mischief beyond description horrible. So he's blaming himself. But there's no repentance. There's never an act or anything where Victor has gone and confessed to anybody about what he's done. So here he says, when I reflected on his crimes and malice, speaking of the creature, okay, he says, my hatred and revenge burst all bounds of moderation. I would have made a pilgrimage to the high peaks of the Andes could I, when there have precipitated him to their base. I wished to see him again, that I might wreak havoc, or that I might wreak the utmost extent of abhorrence on his head and avenge the deaths of William and Justine. So he is resigned to revenge. He wants to kill the creature. And Victor goes off, okay, and leaves and begins wandering about, the countryside, traveling into the mountains and whatnot, just wandering around, roaming like a vagabond, like an outcast. This almost reminds you of the biblical account where when Cain slays his brother Abel and he becomes a wanderer, he's cast out, he bears the mark of Cain, and it says he goes and off to the land of Nod. Well, Victor is wandering, he's basically left his home and is now wandering about, okay, as an outcast. But he's, again, taking delight in nature, and as he's doing so, one day, the creature comes rushing upon him. So again, Victor is praying. It's weird. He's praying to nature again, right? Like he's not praying to God. He's praying to nature. He says, wandering spirits, if indeed ye wander and do not rest in your narrow beds, allow me this faint happiness, or take me as your companion away from the joys of life. And he says, as I said this, I suddenly beheld the figure of a man at some distance, advancing towards me with superhuman speed. So this creature's coming, rushing towards Victor. And when the creature arrives, this is the first time that Victor has communicated with the creature, all right? And what's his first words? Devil! I exclaimed, do you dare approach me? And do not you fear the fierce vengeance of my arm wreaked on your miserable head? Begone, vile insect, or rather stay, that I may trample you to dust. And oh, that I could, with extinction of your miserable existence, restore those victims whom you have so diabolically murdered. So, yeah, what a greeting. Imagine the first time that your father speaks to you. These are the words that comes out of his mouth. Devil, calls him an insect, and then talks about how he wants to exterminate you. Pretty sad. actually. You know, the creatures of intelligence. This is the creature actually communicates. He has the power of speech and the power of reason. He can talk. So this is very unlike the 1931 version, okay, with the movie adaptation with Boris Karloff as the creature, you know, with the bolts in his neck. We've all seen the famous image where he just walks around. This creature is nothing like that. He's highly intelligent. So you're seeing how different this is. No Igor in the story. We never got to see Victor saying, "It's alive! It's alive!" That didn't happen. So a lot of liberties have been taken from this. And unfortunately, I think probably the movie is more known in the culture than the actual book. And that's one of the reasons why we're reading the book. But the creature says, "I expected this reception," said the demon. Again, this is Victor relating the story to Robert Walton, and Robert Walton is writing the story down. So Victor is our narrator. "I expected this reception," said the demon. "All men hate the wretched. How then must I be hated, whom am miserable beyond all living things? Yet you, my creator, detest and spurn me, thy creature, to whom thou art bound by ties only dissoluble by the annihilation of one of us. You purpose to kill me? How dare you sport thus with life?" That's actually the creature's accusing him. Like, okay? He says, "Do your duty towards me, and I will do mine towards you and the rest of mankind. If you will comply with my conditions, I will leave them and you at peace. But if you refuse, I will glut the maw of death until it be satiated with the blood of your remaining friends." So the creature's saying, you know, to Victor, like, I have a request. First he accuses him, says, "How dare you, you know, do this?" No, and then he says, "All mankind hates," what does he say? "All mankind hates the wretched. How then must I be hated?" So the creature is appealing to fate. So again, we have this theme of fate. Like, since all mankind hates the ugly and the wretched, then, you know, I'm consigned to my fate of becoming a monster. He tells Victor, I'm asking you to perform a task for me as your creature, and if you don't do it, I'm going to murder the rest of your family. So Victor responds here, "Abhorred monster, fiend that thou art, the tortures of hell are too mild a vengeance for thy crimes. Wretched devil, you reproach me with your creation. Come on then, that I may extinguish the spark which I so negligently bestowed." My rage was without bounds. I sprang on him, impelled by all the feelings which can arm one being against the existence of another. He easily eluded me and said, "Be calm. I entreat you to hear me before you give vent on your hatred on my devoted head. Have I not suffered enough that you seek to increase my misery? Life, although it may only be the accumulation of anguish, is dear to me, and I will defend it." So Victor goes to attack the creature. The creature evades him and says, "Look, my life is miserable, but I'm still going to defend my life because I value my existence." And then he goes on to say, "I ought to be thy Adam," speaking back to the creation of Adam in the Garden of Eden by God, "but I am rather the fallen angel whom thou drivest from joy for no misdeed." So he's saying, "I ought to be your Adam, but I'm the devil. You know, I'm Lucifer." But he says, "Make me happy." Well, what does he say? "I alone am irrevocably excluded. I was benevolent and good." So he says, my nature, that I was a benevolent and good creature. So here we have kind of this view that mankind is good by nature. So this is not like John Locke, the philosopher who said that man was tabula rasa, that man was a blank slate, or as other people in Western views of Christianity, for instance, like in Calvinism, believes that man is totally depraved, all right, that he's just prone to do evil and malice, by nature. Shelley is putting forth here that she believes that at least, well, these are the views of her father, okay, that man is inherently good and benevolent, and that we're going to see that it's man's surroundings, okay? So the creature is blaming his fate, that he's just fated to be this monster because of the environment around him, okay? It's not my fault, it's society, it's mankind, it's the way I was treated. So again, this theme of fate. The creature believes that he is fated to be monstrous. He says, "Make me happy, and I shall again be virtuous." So here's a question, okay? Are we victims of circumstance? Are we do we become the way that we are because of the way that we're treated by others, because of our surroundings? Do we have a choice in the matter? Can we, as rational souls with a will and a mind, are we able to overcome our circumstances? Or are we just fated to whatever lot in life, the universe has bestowed upon us? So the creature laments his misery, saying, "I'm alone, miserably alone." And he says, "You, my creator, abhor me. What hope can I gather from your fellow creatures who owe me nothing? They spurn and hate me." And he's asking Victor to listen to his tale. He says, "Hear me out. Hear my story. You owe that to me. Don't you at least owe me that much?" And Victor finally relents and is like, "Okay, I'll listen to the creature." So that's where we're going to end today. And next time we will hear the creature's story, which is going to begin in chapter 11. So we will read chapters 11. Let's see here. I think chapter 15. So we're going to read 11 through, I think, 16. Chapter 16. No, yeah. So we'll read chapters 11 through 16 because the first line of chapter 17 is the being finished speaking. So this creature story is 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, and 16. So next time we will hear the creature's story and we'll learn what the creature's been doing for the last 2 years, because Victor just totally forgot all about him. It was like out of sight, out of mind until William's murder. He didn't really think about the creature anymore. All right. Let me know what you think about this section. Are you liking Frankenstein, or you enjoy reading it? Maybe you've given up already. Maybe you don't like Frankenstein. That's fine, But if you stuck around this far, let me know what you think about it. Leave a comment for me. What questions has this text raised for you? What insights do you have? As you're reading this, what kind of questions is this generating for you? What kind of answers do you have to those questions? I'd like to know what you think. So leave a comment for me. All right? Thanks for watching. And until next time, have a wonderful day.